Today we intend to discuss claims projections for 2021. I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure you'll agree, that if we'd been having this conversation this time last year, we could never have projected the reality of what has actually happened in 2020. Undoubtedly, it's been a challenging year for so many, and I think unfortunately the challenges aren't over yet. But there are also so many positives to be taken too, in terms of how incredibly resilient and innovative so many businesses have been. So if you were to look ahead, what do you think we can expect to see as we move into 2021 in terms of the claims landscape?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about this time last year and whether we could have predicted what was going to happen, but let's try to predict what's going to happen over the next 12 months or so. I think we would all accept that there was a downturn in claims volumes in the first half of 2020. And that was for many reasons. So there was obviously a change in vehicle usage and people's working and commuting patterns. Most construction sites obviously had to stop operating. So there was likely to be a fall in the number of incidents occurring. And I think add to that the fact that the courts in March essentially ceased to function as normal or at normal capacity. And actions which would normally have been litigated just weren't raised, and ongoing procedure was halted in the vast majority of cases. So I think we're going to come on to talk later about how quickly the courts were able to adapt and innovate and get back up and running again for the most part. Although there's still no civil jury trials at the moment, although jury trials in criminal cases have taken place with juries sitting, observing court proceedings from cinemas to allow for social distancing. And I don't, last year if someone had ever said that was going to happen, then I just don't think we would have believed it, but here we are. We've certainly seen litigation volumes increase in the latter half of this year, and I think those volumes will continue to increase as we move into and through 2021 and beyond that for a number of reasons.
And so maybe can you expand on that and just describe what you think those reasons are?
Sure. So firstly, group proceedings, as most people probably know, came into force in Scotland at the end of July this year. And that obviously allows two or more people with the same similar or related claims to come together to raise a single action in the Court of Session. And I think it's just worth pointing out some of the differences in Scotland. Group proceedings are opt-in, so potential class members have to opt in or elect to join a class in order to participate, rather than the US system is opt-out. So those within a class definition are automatically included and they have to opt out of the proceedings. So the aim of the new rules in Scotland is to make it easier for claims to be brought, and we know that pursuers agents will be quick off the mark. I read last week, thought it was interesting, about the group of ex-rugby union internationals who intend to apparently send a letter of claim to the governing bodies of sport in England and Wales, claiming they've all developed early signs of dementia as a result of repeated blows to the head during rugby. And it's reported there's another 80 former players who are showing similar symptoms. So, it looks like we may see some sort of class action there. And that's actually very interesting. So there's been lots of really interesting evidence emerge about the correlation between the brain being subjected to repeated blows and the impact that can have on memory loss, depression, progressive dementia. The case in the US was obviously highly publicised at the time, back in 2011, and that was a group of NFL players who settled, I think it was around 1 billion. So I think if that's happening in England and Wales, then it's going to happen in Scotland, and it's likely to move beyond rugby into other contact sports. So I think that's definitely an area to watch, and one that I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about going forward. Also with group proceedings, there's the absence of limitation on abuse claims in Scotland, and the introduction of qualified one-way cost shifting, or QWOCs. So that's on the horizon, potentially by the end of the year. So it's not difficult to see that litigation across the board is likely to increase.
Yeah, and I think I absolutely agree with all of those points you make, and certainly when I reflect on QWOCs coming into force in Scotland and what impact I think it's likely to have one thought that comes to my mind is that its introduction might be the point at which we see COVID claims tip into litigation, but I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have clients who've already seen COVID claims coming in, so I think it's a complete certainty that that's going to continue. By direct, so there's two types of claims. Obviously, direct claims, so those, I mean, which relate to a person infected with COVID-19 and who then claims against a third party in respect of the failure to protect them from the harm. I think that claimant agents, as you say, they hold back litigating such claims until QOX comes into play. Causation's likely to be a key battleground in those sorts of claims, particularly those which occurred at the early part of the pandemic where there was no formal testing regime. And I think against that background, it's easy to see why agents will look where they can to secure the benefit of cost protection from QOX. I think it's also worth adding that pursuers agents could also be holding back, and obviously time bar permitting, where they're not quite so confident or it's not quite so cut that liability is going to attach. So therefore, they're likely to hold off litigating until they have that protection in place. So when I think about COVID claims, there are two types. There's one of direct infection, and then the claims which are going to arise as an indirect consequence of COVID. So 2021 is likely going to see direct infection claims being made, and as I say, we know that some have already come in, and also bring an entirely new subject matter into place. This is a type of claim which we haven't seen before, COVID being a new phenomenon. I also expect that in 2021, in addition to seeing these new types of claim, we're going to see a shift in claims trends. So as I see it, the number of stress at work claims are likely to be higher than before, given the effect of prolonged home working for so many, or potentially for furloughed workers who are not working at all, and the mental health impacts of that. It also seems inevitable that the restrictions on liberty are going to mean that an increased number of claims will arise from areas of high effort during the pandemic. So if we think of sectors such as retail, supply chain, healthcare, and probably for the most part, if not for infection, then for musculoskeletal injuries. I also think we'll see an increased number of claims in the care sector. Equally, I think the first half of 2021, the level of road traffic claims and slips and trip claims will be lower than normal, and that obviously reflects a reduced number of incidents occurring during 2020 when less people were on the road or on third-party property. And I think it's important to mention that we have to be alive for the potential for an increase in the number of fraudulent claims. We know, and we've seen from the past, that in turbulent economic times, insurance fraud tends to rise. We certainly saw that back in 2008. The industry generally, I would say, has become much more sophisticated across the board, both identifying and tackling fraudulent claims, and we need to continue to work together on this. I think it's fair to say the Scottish courts have perhaps been a bit less robust than the courts south of the border in terms of penalising claimants, where at least part of the claim is genuine, but they have been willing to impose sanctions on expenses that pursuers are entitled to recover. So I think it's crucial from the outset that we think carefully about defence strategy in a suspected fraudulent claim, and in particular the protection that can be put in place at an early stage to provide protection on costs at the very least.
No, I think you're right, and I think what you touched upon there is going to be new areas of thought for all of us really in 2021. But going back to something we spoke about earlier and the positive things we can take from 2020, and if I'm reflecting on it, I think the positive story from 2020 has been our ability to innovate and to adapt to change so quickly. But I just wondered, what impact do you think that experience and probably the newfound confidence that we all have now to do things differently will have on claims in 2021?
Well, I think undoubtedly the claims experience in 2021 will be different to what it was in early 2020 and the years before that. I think that's both in terms of how claims are handled by insurers and lawyers, and also in the types of claims which our clients will see come across their desks and which we as lawyers are going to be asked to address. I think the move towards conducting parts of the claims defence process remotely is already starting to feel pretty normal, actually. I didn't think I would ever say that, but I mentioned earlier about how quickly the courts were able to adapt, and I think we all have. And that was particularly so for cases involving legal submissions rather than where evidence has to be led. So, thinking back to the first lockdown in March, the first inner-house virtual court hearing took place in just April. So we've then gone on to develop that. We've had proofs with evidence being led virtually, and I do expect that virtual court hearings will remain, and particularly for procedural matters. And the use could expand out to more local courts. And even if you think about virtual consultations with experts, I think we'll see a lot more of that happening going forward. That's something that I suspect will stay with us. And claimants and our clients like using virtual means as parts of the evidence gathering process. I think agents were, me included, probably initially nervous about the prospects of an expert assessing someone over Zoom, but actually for certain types of claim, and probably particularly in the sphere of employment reports, for example, it's actually very effective, both in terms of cost and efficiency. So as I say, I think that is something that will continue. In Scotland, it seems that the electronic lodging of court documents will become the default position across all courts and all claims levels during the course of 2021. That was a focus before the pandemic in any event, and that innovation will continue, but perhaps at a greater speed than before. And I don't think we're going to see an electronic pre-action portal become part of the Scottish claims landscape in the near future, even for personal injury, but I think we'll see greater calls for that to be put in place. And in the interim, it seems that the already now almost exclusive use of email for presenting and negotiating claims is going to continue. I think that's a good thing. It helps us to drive efficiency into the claims handling process, and it also helps to reduce life cycles. I think it's worth saying there will always remain a human element to defending claims, and there will continue to be a need for site visits, and in certain cases face-to-face consultations and assessments will be required. Even things like pre-trial meetings, I personally think they work better, face-to-face, truly face-to-face, instead of being by virtual means. But I think for now, the advantages of technology are clearer than ever before. So it's worth having it as a point of reflection in each and every case about what is the best way to do things, what's best for this particular case, for this particular set of circumstances. We've now got more tools than ever to be able to drive efficiency and reduce spend into the claims handling process. And I think that is a real positive for everyone involved in claims defence, and particularly in light of the recent and expected legal developments that we've talked about. I think that's, I don't know if you had any other questions before we finish.
No, I think it's a lot to consider for 2021, but also a lot to look forward to, and hopefully it'll be something new again for next year.
Absolutely. That's the one staple. Things never stay the same.
Definitely not.